cloud because that's easier, and then we will start admitting people.
Oh.
Possibly, you know, I
Or
think
it's almost like a mall.
So hello, everybody. I see people, your dogs barking, all kinds of interesting things in the background. So we'll let people join in here. We'll start in just a moment. Just a reminder to our audience to please mute. We also have a facilitator who will help to mute people, but that will be appreciated. Right. All right. We have 32 participants in the room, more were joining. It's a few minutes after the hour, so I think we should get started. Let me stop sharing that screen. All right. Hello and welcome to our Wednesday webinar presented by the TEA Western North American Division. My name is Darren Brown. I'm on the Western Division Board and the Vice President of Production Operations at Dynamic Attractions. So a note to everybody who's watching before we start, this presentation is being recorded. So all participants and attendees, people in the chat, just be aware that there may be a chance you will be recorded as part of this, and this will potentially be posted publicly in the future, so be aware. Today, we are presenting the second in a series of panel discussions about the metaverse. So our first session provided an entry point to the topic of experience design in the metaverse, and looked at connections between designing themed environments in the physical world and designing digital environments in the metaverse. So today we're going to start with a recap of that first discussion, and then we're going to take a step further into the process and talk about design principles, tools used, and general framework for the metaverse applications with a focus on relevance to themed entertainment. So joining me today are three people with some really diverse perspectives on metaverse applications and some pretty cool titles. We have Kathleen Cohen, XR immersive strategist, tech humanist, and founder of the Collaboratorium. Kathleen's background includes over 25 years building both user and guest experiences, starting in media and entertainment, working as a creative producer for DreamWorks Interactive, also at IBM Centers for Innovation and Walt Disney Parks and Resorts. He sits on the advisory board of Holoride in Munich, a spin-out of Audio Innovation, so think VR in your car. The past 4 years, Kathleen has also been the jury chair and keynote speaker for the German Aurea Award, the conference and awards show focusing on excellence in immersive AR and VR entertainment, hosted by Europa Park, Europe's second largest theme park. Kathleen was recently speaking at the Milken Global Conference alongside Deepak Chopra, taking a look into the metaverse. Her latest talks are A Place Called Now, Being Human, Becoming Human, and Beyond Human, IRL versus XR, The Future and Present Converge, and Meet Your Digital Twin, a talk about the land rush to recreate humans. We also have Dane Smith, Chief Strategy Officer for the Third Floor. Dane is a digital content producer currently serving as CSO at the Third Floor, where evaluation of emergent technology and practical applications in metaverse are in growing demand. As Chief Strategy Officer, Dane oversees the Third Floor's implementation of pre-visualization, virtual production, and real-time content creation. And he's also a Canadian, which generates some extra points for me too, so. Oh, Canada. And finally, we have Michael Libby, technological utopianist, founder and CEO of World Builder. Michael also serves on the Western North American board of the TEA with me, and prior to starting his own company, had positions with the Walt Disney Imagineering, Thinkwell, and others. He's a futurist, has developed proprietary software that revolutionizes the audio-visual integration process for any location-based attraction or environment, giving remote collaborators the ability to see all elements of a project together in virtual reality. All right, that's who is here. So 2 additional points before we start, and then we'll get going. Feel free to post your questions in the chat as we go, and hopefully at the end we'll have some time to circle back to them. So I'll be monitoring those and trying to pluck out some things. I'm also going to be posting a link to a survey in the chat throughout the event. We'd like to gauge everybody's general knowledge level of the metaverse, and also gauge what topics you're interested in for future installments of this series. So let's get started. This panel series you're watching now came about when Kathleen approached the TEA with the idea of putting sessions together covering aspects of the metaverse. I was connected with Kathleen and immediately wondered, what am I going to do with this? My general day job involves building ride vehicles and coaster track and steel structures. So really real world, not so much virtual world. But Kathleen suggested that I could represent some of the TEA membership who is inquisitive about this stuff and would like to know more. So here I am, ready to soak up some knowledge. So let's start with a recap of what we talked about last time and a general kind of orientation on what the metaverse is and maybe isn't. So Kathleen.
Yeah, thanks so much, Darren. That was great intros for all of us. And thanks everybody for being here. When we did our last session, I don't think it was recorded. So what I did is recorded just 5.5, 6 minutes right now of a little bit of a combo of what Metaverse 101 is for folks, if you don't know, plus what's been added in the short period of time between these two talks. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. I recorded it earlier today, just so there was no hiccup. So hold on one sec. Let's get this going and let's make sure you can see it. And can you see my screen? Thumbs up. All right, I'm going to run this right now. Thanks everyone for including me today. Super excited to be here. So yeah, what exactly is the metaverse? It's the internet in 360, or it's the blending of physical and digital worlds. And some say it's a singled, shared, persistent 3D virtual space where we humans experience life in ways we couldn't in physical worlds. Yes, it's a place. It's a place for commerce, for community, for learning, for work, for enjoying gaming together, gathering, building. But it's a layover over our physical worlds. And as a designer and as a creator, I call it spatial computing. So if you're still asking what the metaverse is, upon my own research, here's some other words or phrases used that might also resonate with you. There's some good ones in here on that list. But there's two paths to experience the metaverse. The question is, though, what permission do you want to give yourself to experience it? Because you can do it from the reality path of twinning what we see in the real world, from maps to streets to operational health data of buildings and structures, and really replicating the real world, or from a fantasy path, from the gaming environments to community-led organizations like DAOs, to immersive experiences, and to the many different social media platforms. So to break it down, I'm going to make it super easy. The metaverse is three things. It's worlds, it's the people in those worlds, and it's the economy. My colleague, Alan Smithson, posted, the metaverse is the nexus of the current internet plus these three technologies laid on top of it. The visual layer, which is called extended reality, or maybe real-time 3D, also referred to as user experience in 2.0. The power layer, which is called blockchain or distributed ledger technology, and then the impact layer, which is AI, and that's a necessary part of this whole infrastructure. There's more to the infrastructure. We're finally getting a version control on standards for this space. So this is a huge step over the last 10 to 20 years. This metaverse ecosystem as a whole also includes hardware and software and connectivity and cloud computing and developer services and media and all of that. I only have 5 minutes. I can't get into that here. But when we talk about immersive worlds, we can't help but to pull from the past and from the future. So accessing these virtual spaces from gaming consoles, PCs, VR gear, mobile devices, we've been doing it. We've been doing it since World of Warcraft with the largest virtual economy of real dollars. Second Life was a closed platform with its currency traded called Linden dollars. And now Facebook's Meta has made a promise that Horizon Worlds will be the most collaborative platform in virtual reality. And then there's social and workplace VR tools like VR Chat and Spatial and AltSpace VR. Even Burning Man and BRC VR, which is hosted in AltSpace, is a great place to visit. And of course, if you have kids or you're in the agency world looking at music, sports, and retail, you know firsthand that opportunities of building worlds and brands on these platforms like Roblox, Fortnite, and Minecraft are currently all in fashion. There's also Rec Room. And to go deeper into this, we embark on decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, like Decentraland and Sandbox, where you can buy land and create a marketplace within their own economies. And also, we can speak to workplace platforms like GatherTown. That's like Zoom and Slack having a baby. So those are the worlds. Let's move to people. In this case, you can also go fantasy or reality. You can use many tools for avatar creation, like Ready Player Me. Or you can get on the volumetric capture stages, like we do in Hollywood, and you can actually digitize yourself as a digital double or an avatar. You can go the route of holograms and telepresence, and we can beam you live. You could develop a photorealistic AI-driven virtual avatar from just a 2D picture of you, which is pretty impressive. And for that matter, you don't even have to be real. Unreal's MetaHuman tool, the 3D character creator, makes people that have never been real humans before, technically, deep fakes. And even more comprehensive is Soul Machines out of New Zealand, making humanized AIs where they've actually built a virtual gene pool that IDs every AI that has ever been created. So we might need to think or rethink what it is to be human in the next decade, because robots are becoming humans and humanoids, and humans are becoming digitized or humanized AIs. We're currently sitting in a gap defining what it is to be sentient. And lastly, let's briefly talk about the marketplace. The marketplace might have been popularized with some of these icons that I'm going to go in clockwise that you might know. You might know Bored Apes and its digital asset collections, NFTs, but then we have buying land and virtual real estate, and it's many different platforms you can do that. Inside big games and gaming engines, you can see music concerts, which garner 27 million viewers. And we also have digital twinning of your whole industrial manufacturing pipeline for another revenue stream, or maybe it's revised BIM models for the metaverse. And then you see social media influencers who are virtual humans, a robot with 3 million followers. And then we have, of course, digital fashion and retail, because if you can't afford a Balenciaga bag or a Gucci puffy in real life, maybe you can now. The marketplace ecosystem can give you many opportunities to play in several ways. You could jump in at the creation part, the sales part, the ownership part, or the economic part. And since I look at things from an experience design point of view, we now say the metaverse and immersive in the same sentence. And I know that traditional experience designers have been building immersive worlds for years in real life. So is building that same framework for the metaverse any different? How you come to the table to advance the conversation could be from in real life design, from on-screen design, or in-world design. The point is we're collapsing 3 planes of content into a new experience. It's tribrid, it's not hybrid. In real life experience design is a huge part of this new equation on how we want people to feel. Thank you so much. That was the metaverse in 6 minutes.
Perfect. We've taken it all in and know it all now.
We're pros.
Way more to digest over time. So thanks for that, Kathleen. That's a really good overview, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions that stem just from that. So now that we have some footing in the world we're discussing, let's talk about what we came here to talk about today. Let's talk about design principles and the process of designing for the metaverse. So for that, we're gonna take a few minutes with Dane. So Dane, at the 3rd floor, you're dealing with virtual and simulated spaces for all kinds of applications, from kind of big blockbuster movies to location-based entertainment. What's your approach to design the metaverse and design principles?
So first of all, thank you for that presentation, Kathleen. I feel completely educated on metaverse. That was great. I really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for attending, and Darren for inviting me in. Darren and I worked together on a project that I'm going to touch on today in my case studies that I think is a good example. The company I represent is a vendor. So we have a vested interest in finding out where the economic opportunities are and building tools and proficiencies to leverage those bets. And I think that the approach really began with the visual fidelity that game engines provided. 10 years ago, we were on a project, a film, Suicide Squad, and we first used game engine for a technique called post-viz, where you approximate what the final visual effects will look like to stand a film up for test screenings or editorial choices. You know, a few frames here or there on one of these blockbusters can really add up. So the ability to look at what the eventual visual effect will look like was something that our clients were interested in. and we first started exploring the use of game engine. After that came Avatar and a lot of development that we did on the architecture for Mandalorian, and the game engine has evolved to be more filmmaker friendly and less catering to that gaming community. So the design process, I think, really hasn't changed much. I mean, our DNA is creating visually persistent digital worlds and aligning with IP and getting inside what the intent of that IP is. I think the promise now that we're starting to see fulfilled is taking that outside of those very sort of narrow definitions. And it all begins the same way any digital design would begin. But we're all aware of the fact that the economies have all moved to experience bases. The next generation are less interested in possessions than they are in experiences, and that reflects itself in their demands and their entertainment choices. I think it leads to some of the weakening theatrical market, and I feel like we're on the verge of some experiential shared digital and physical environment. And there are a couple of reasons that I believe that. So today we rarely offer anything that isn't physical and digital. And the question really is, what can we do that's experiential, that's not possible in 2D? Not a replication or a digital double, not a perfect simulation of the real world, but something that uses that as a starting point or a launching pad. And there are three examples I want to give. One of them is a crypto coin called Shibu that we were contracted to start to build the inception seed for the Shibuverse. And what that means is building very high quality, visually interesting, design-driven architecture. And it's really a real estate market. If you go online and look it up, people are buying and selling simulated real estate. And we had a great deal of success with that and learned a lot about the community and sort of the rules of the road. But the project that is really emblematic of what we're talking about today, I think, is Nintendo World. And Darren and I, our host, actually worked together on that project. And what that imagined is Shigeru Miyamoto's Mario characters in an environment, a location-based entertainment environment in Osaka, Japan, that would allow customers to enter that space and with a very low imprint set of AR goggles. So Mario and Luigi wear caps, and there's a small visor in front of the cap. And this allows you to integrate into the very beautiful lighting and practical and physical world that is all top-notch digital characters and bespoke experiences. So it speaks to that need of the gaming community to have some agency over their entertainment. My generation is very comfortable sitting at the arc light and letting someone else's vision unspool in front of us. I think subsequent generations want a little bit more say and agency over their entertainment choices. And this allows both to happen, but it's also a bespoke experience. When you factor in AI and gaze activation and you have very sensitive computational simulations being run that track where I'm looking, what's engaging me, that data can be used to really customize the experience. Layered over that, you have generational love of IP. I mean, think of Star Wars. The first film came out in the late 70s. You've got grandparents that are teaching the grandchildren about it. What better place to experience this than a physical location that combines those two elements? And the result is wildly popular. It's been a huge hit, and it was an interesting process because we're inventing everything for the first time. The other thing that it kind of casts a shadow over all of this conversation, but like most things in life, there's a good and bad. I've suffered personal loss as a result of COVID, but the benefit of COVID was it forced us to think of remote collaboration and ways to work that we hadn't before. And in fact, in the midst of working on this project for Universal Parks, COVID hit, and we had to make some very tough decisions, which crews were going to stay behind, how we were going to continue working in this world. And a lot of that decision-making relied on ingenuity. We didn't have a huge budget, but also informed the way that the dailies ran, the fact that we're on different continents and we have to virtually transport ourselves to the ride and understand how our decisions are impacting the look and experience of our clients. So it was, there were a lot of benefits to that parameter being put in place. And then the last piece of it for our company is a relationship with digital artist Krista Kim, and that's the high art world. This is an avant-garde artist who created something called Mars House, which was the first piece of real estate to sell in Metaverse, and it imagines this space on Mars that's used for meditation and healing. And Krista has done things like turn the clocks backwards in Times Square and very sort of performance art oriented content. And there's a huge amount of interest in that. Again, I'm a vendor, so I need to have a commercial reason to be exploring anything in a very deep way. And there was a tremendous amount of traffic I noticed. If you look at high-end art and you look at high-end fashion, if you just go right now to look up Vogue/crypto in your browser, you'll see all kinds of activity going on in Metaverse and digital components to fashion and real estate purchases that are really interesting, and a lot of activity. So there's transaction taking place. And I think some of the early releases that were very widely publicized were not the highest and best visual design. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of the designs that we've been responsible for, and a lot of the community find their way to folks that are still skeptical about Metaverse. And the last thing I'll say is there is a lot of skepticism. I do get eye rolls when I use words like Metaverse among certain clients and colleagues, but I would look at our social media activity and compare my social media feed with my real life. And that gap, because I'm happy and everything's working out for me on Facebook. If I look at the real life progression and that gap is a Metaverse. I'm creating a version of myself that is digital and out there trading and conversing and sharing experiences with other digital people. And that really is the starting line. And I think we will just advance from there. So to sum it up, the design principles haven't changed at all. It's matching in the digital world the same design that we so carefully put together physically, and then coming up with a way to augment it. Why are we in the digital world? Why is this digital replication of something physical, enticing or interesting? Who is the audience? And I think in the case of Mario Kart, the reason it's fascinating is because anyone that grew up playing that game just loves the idea of entering the game and interacting with those characters. So I think the first place that we're going to really see this move is in location-based entertainment.
Great. No, it's really interesting, and it's really valuable, Dean, having somebody from your perspective as part of this panel, just because you work in such sort of broad, accessible things that we can all identify with in terms of Marvel movies and Super Nintendo world and all those types of things. So there's people can kind of connect with what you're saying. So moving on around the panel, Kathleen, how do you define principles that will guide development on a given project for you?
I mean, that runs the gamut, but you know what? I have to weigh in on, Dane, we had talked about this earlier. When you talk about IP, we haven't gotten here yet. And Michael, you have plenty to present on the tool side. But when we talk about IP moving forward, we're talking about people's prompts now in generative AI, people that prompt in all these new pieces of software like Midjourney, Dolly, ChatGPT. Your prompt is your new IP. So Dane, I really look at what principles we know of right now is up for a big change in the next 5 years. So it's hard to say, follow these principles, because it's almost like I came from Waterfall, from IBM Innovation, and going from Waterfall to Agile was like, oh my God, we're losing quality. And how do you keep quality if you keep iterating? Well, now the general masses are okay if you have a bunch of errors, and everybody's okay shipping with bugs and problems. And I'm like, I don't come from that at all. So it's hard to answer principles in one way because it's changing so fast. We're in like tools, what I call Operation Toolbox right now for the next 5 years. Although some people beg to differ, like experience designers who say the platform's already there. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say without taking up too much time for you, Michael, too.
Yeah, Michael, do you have kind of thoughts on design principles and approach?
I sure do. And I'm coming to you actually live from the Metaverse. And as you can see, it's a beautiful day here. I've just lucked out with the weather. So that's great. No, I think, I think Kathleen is right on that right now, the big two tools are Unity and Unreal. And those are very advanced pieces of software. I've been using Unity for about 10 years and still learn something new every day. I had to learn how to code, and it's very laborious. But you know, these next 5 years are exactly that. They're a tooling period where these no code and low code tools that are designer tools will be starting to emerge. They're in development right now. And you know, I think that really the closest thing that exists to the metaverse today is Roblox. It is, you know, which is not VR, by the way, and that's an important distinction to make. VR does not equal metaverse. It is a viewing device through which you can access the metaverse in an immersive way, but you can just as easily access it on your desktop or smartphone. But what it is this virtual environment where people can remotely attend and collaborate and build things. I think one of the things that's missing, that's not there yet, is permanence. You know, when you turn it off or when you log out, the experience always restarts. And I think also the big other thing that's missing is designers, experienced designers. And we have all these tools, but there's a reason Roblox experiences are not like intricate theme park attractions. And that reason is because it's a skill set that needs to be developed and learned. And so just because the tools exist, that doesn't necessarily mean that awesome experiences will be created inside of those tools. I think, you know, some of the earliest metaverse installations, if you will, were really just duplicates of maybe flagship retail stores where they did a scan and brought in a static environment. And there wasn't really anything to do. And that's the biggest problem. That's problem number one, I think, is there needs to be fun things to do and to see and experience. And there's nobody more qualified to do that than attraction designers. Talking about AI, you know,
Hey,
AI.
Michael, can I say one thing really quick?
Yeah, please.
Really quick on the Roblox thing. I have a client, I'm not going to name the client, who I, for a long time, kept saying, I believe me when I tell you, you need to twin your property. And it has taken 5 years for them to hear me. And you know what their answer was? It's already been done in Roblox this year. We don't need it now, Kathleen. And I was like, are you kidding me with this? Anyway, as you were.
Yeah, and you know, we can get into tools and things like that, but there are many different ways to do it. And developing things for a game engine is very, very different than for the real world. One of the biggest obstacles that I find is designers within LBE will create 3D models, you know, in Revit or BIM models and things like that. And that's our process in LBE. And we need to create those really detailed architectural models. That's just a part of what we do. But the process for bringing those into game engines is actually quite difficult because they need to be optimized and they need to be performative so that the frame rate stays high and is very smooth. Like I'm sure everybody here has played a video game where there's a bunch of stuff happening on the screen and all of a sudden it gets choppy. And that's because the computer is struggling to render this stuff at a smooth frame rate. So there's this weird catch-22 where we are the professionals that create the best types of experiences, but we also create the most incompatible file formats in some ways. So I think there's going to be a learning curve there, as well as some tools that sort of auto-optimize some of these things. Actually, Kathleen's background, you can see, that's probably a LiDAR scan or a photogrammetry scan. And, you know, they're also point cloud scans. There are now apps on your phone where you can just move your phone around and scan your apartment like that. And it's already optimized for game engine use, and you can navigate it with just a few clicks. But of course, that's never going to be a production ready model for building a physical installation. It's just not accurate enough. So we're in, yeah.
Can I just weigh in? Let me just say one thing to make it relative to everybody. The reason why this was created is because I took an art residency during COVID, which I physically could not take residency in the house because the whole state was under COVID red. And so I was like, well, like any metaverse designer would do, let's twin the space that I actually would be in and invite everybody virtually to the space. So this was having asked somebody on the ground in the state where I wasn't there to go to the house and do a quick scan so I could see the layout of the house, so I could see what it was that I was dealing with and how I was going to bring people to the table. So there was a use case for why I needed a quick scan. And then, of course, we did something much more.
There's also an economic factor, if I could weigh in. If you listen to what Michael's saying, which I agree with wholeheartedly, there's a lot of risk involved for the first movers, because I'm being asked to build a pipeline that ties together all these disparate iPhone apps and various file formats, which is the biggest pain point in all of this, really. Just getting everything to align and go through the pipe is a great deal of efforts expended doing that. But at the same time, to build any kind of permanence and investment in the tools and the people to stand that pipeline up is all predicated on me understanding what the audience will want. And that is a very shifting target. So it's a big ask of the early movers to invest all that time and energy for a prospective target that may move.
Can I jump in on that too? Because what I've just found in a recent client is it's an unbelievable task for me to use tools to sell it immersively internally to get approval on top of what the end user is ultimately going to need and be. So it was just as much of an ask, Dane, for me to do this internally to sell it to a huge organization. And for that, I was like, oh, this is just almost the same effort, but right. I got to spin it internally somehow to a client.
Right. Educating the clients. Sometimes our press and our steps forward are our worst enemies with clients that have seen something or read something and are drawing assumptions and conclusions based on this being market ready. And I haven't seen examples where it truly is in a replicated way.
I will say this last thing. It's like the big data era. Most folks are like, until it smacks us in the face, do I have to do anything? Can we just operate as is? That's kind of where we're at.
Yeah.
Right.
There's also a big learning curve when it comes to interactivity and game design. Those are two things that we're not building anything. It's not about what we're building. It's about what we're doing. And that becomes a little more abstract, again, coming from our industry. I've been on many projects where, we're in concept and the project team will talk about, okay, we have all these screens everywhere and the people will walk around and there will be gameplay in the area and the gameplay will influence what appears on the screens.
Right.
And I say, well, that's great, but what is the gameplay? And then things kind of screech to a halt. And that is actually probably the hardest part, again, is creating activities that are fun and that are well-designed and well-balanced games. But that's different than creating a 3D model and creating show set and lighting packages and things like that. So, actual gameplay is a really important factor. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of these things fail and a lot of baggage around the word metaverse, because right now people, again, are just creating a twin of the space itself, but not really thinking about what happens in the space.
I will say this, coming from gaming, and this is OG, back from the first Medal of Honor team back in 1996, so I'm like aging myself. Gaming's built on a premise of rewards base. We keep leveling you up based on rewards. And so do we want to build new worlds based on rewards base? I don't want a hyper reality where I'm gamifying going to the market. So it's to a point, and I agree with you, Michael, that gamifying and engagement is super important so people are engaged, but to a point of the morality on this, that's the other side, is how far we're going.
But I also think there's a commodity to it. In other words, if you look at Dot Swoosh, Nike's play in Metaverse, people are designing, building, and selling content that is Nike branded. And if I'm wearing a hoodie that has a physical emblem on it, and you're aware or part of that culture, you know that there's a digital twin someplace and it's constantly evolving. And so I think that the gameplay or the rewards-based system could transition to, you know, the community you belong to and how much time you've spent there. One of the metaverse explorations we did rewarded repeated visits with an appearance. You know, you could tell by the person, the digital representation of the person entering the space, how seasoned they were, whether it was their first visit or they had been there many times. And maybe that has some currency or value that may replace collecting points or some of the things you're concerned about, Kathleen. I think everything is sort of up for consideration right now.
For what it's worth, last night I listened to one of the biggest gaming funds on the venture side have a discussion, and they very much separate themselves from Metaverse. So it was another interesting play on 1 in every 6 folks across the entire world is engaged in gaming, and how we separate those numbers from spatial computing, Metaverse, how we, you know, begin to evolve.
I wanted to take a step back quickly. We kind of touched on tools before, but Michael, you were going to talk a little bit more, I believe, about tools and what kind of tools you've been using and what you see kind of coming up in the pipeline.
Yeah, so again, you know, the big 2 tools right now are Unity and Unreal. Both of them have their pros and cons. I think Unreal really has sort of, you know, it's an arms race. They both started as game engines, but what you may not be aware of is that Unreal started as a AAA game engine, whereas Unity started really as a mobile app development platform. So they're really on 2 opposite sides of the spectrum, and they're, you know, now they're sort of converging in the middle. So both do have pros and cons. Something to keep in mind, you know, my company has chosen to partner with Unity. They're both trying to make these land grabs outside of gaming and expand into other industries. And, you know, Dane, I'm sure you can talk about this a lot. Unreal has basically won movies and TV. Like, they have virtual production for movies and TV for the most part. Unity has made incredible inroads into architecture, engineering, and construction, which obviously is incredibly relevant to what we do as attraction designers and experience designers. One advantage of Unity, and the reason why we chose Unity over Unreal, is for that exact reason that it started as a mobile app development platform, because a lot of these devices coming out, these headsets, these AR and VR headsets that are not tethered, they run on mobile chipsets and components. And the devices that people are carrying around with them are cell phones and, you know, might soon be headsets, but they are mobile. And so developing AAA graphics, to me, doesn't really make sense for the hardware that's being used. It's great if you're creating real-time content that can, you know, like the Millennium Falcon ride, where you're on a huge screen and there's a bunch of detail and things like that, and that's a great use case for Unreal. But when it comes to the metaverse, we've strategically chosen Unity.
I would love to say one thing about that, which is there's nothing more intimate in a low fidelity world building environment that you're in, or a world that you're in, and having audio be the most intimate thing. I'm sitting next to an avatar completely lo-fi, and I'm like, I'm sitting in somebody's living room. Who is this person on the other side? It's super intimate. And there's a big argument for why high fidelity wouldn't work in that case. And I can go into 5 more use cases, but yeah, there's a reason aside from rapid prototype.
And I think it's interesting that Unity purchased Weta. So I think this transmedia, which is a word that I've, you know, depending on who's saying it and what they mean, it's not my favorite word, but the idea as a vendor that I'm creating something that will be all things to all people. I'm building an asset for your film. You can put it in a theme park, in a game, on your mobile device. It's a hologram. And we haven't, in my opinion, based on what I've seen, arrived at a place where my clients are willing to cover the expense and decision-making process, the time and effort it would require to anticipate those eventual uses and monetize them. It's still very much a stop and start. But
And
I think
Dean,
that Unity buying Weta is very telling.
I was just going to add on that, which is there's probably nobody on the inside, also on the client side, that can manage this, and that you come across all the time. There is no you, Kathleen, in our pipeline. So we got to constantly lean on just you. So can you just twin yourself? I'm like, yeah, I've been on it for 10 years.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I would say when you're talking about IP as well, the Hollywood studios, yeah, they're not there where they have the foresight to create an asset, say like a creature or a character. They're not there where they have the foresight to create one asset that can work in a film, but also work on a mobile device. They'll just remodel it for the mobile device and put the time and money into doing that. The companies that are sort of on the forefront of this, unsurprisingly, are the gaming companies like Activision Blizzard and Riot Games. They see the transmedia possibilities of this IP, and so they kind of build from the ground up for that.
Well, in 1996 to 2000, we were low rent in the gaming world. We were looked at and looked down on from the VFX world, Dane.
Sure.
You guys looked down on us. And then all of a sudden, I mean, I kid, but
but it's true. The worst thing you could hear in a review with a director is it looks video gamey. That was cutting you off at the knees. That was the worst comment or note you could get. And that's completely changed. Good point.
Yeah, I mean, and now we're the ones that know how to build worlds. We built them with a different, point of view, but we knew how to build worlds at least. As you were, Michael.
So we're talking about tools. If I can do a quick screen share here, not to be too self-promotional, but ETF view. Hold on, I'm going to turn off the volume. Just a quick snippet of our own software. Can everybody see this? So this is the World Builder software, and what we're looking at is a dark ride, and we've built a digital twin of it, but this is a SketchUp model that has been imported.
Oops.
Sorry, can you hear me?
You're back with audio.
Yeah,
All right. Yeah. So the Zoom avatar feature is in beta right now. It's not a fully baked product, which also really can be said about the metaverse in general, I think. So this is our tool set, and it was quite difficult to create a pipeline where we can bring in and optimize geometry. That's a big deal. How do you remove polygons from a very detailed model without losing the fundamental shape of the model? That's something that people haven't solved. And what we're trying to do here is create a no-code programming tool. Exactly like Kathleen said, we're in this tooling phase, so that it's much easier. We're inspired by things like Minecraft and Roblox and Super Mario Maker and things like that as our interface. We want it to be easy to create experiences and author experiences. And this is something that I've said before, at the risk of repeating myself. It's not just about the facility or the building. It's about what happens inside the facility. You have to be able to do or see something that you can't in the real world. Otherwise, it's just an inferior version of the real physical thing. So that's what we're doing with World Builder. Something else I want to touch on is, of course, AI, which is in the news all over the place. I had the privilege to spend a big chunk of last year working at Microsoft with their OpenAI tools. And honestly, I felt like I knew this secret that was about to be unleashed onto the world. It's really going to be that transformative. And that's going to be a huge part of the tooling process as well, where you can just speak things into existence. And I have a specific example that I want to share. I saw this And it really just blew my mind when I saw it. This is a project called Electric Sheep. And okay, the sound's off. And what happens is the user enters, so it asks, what do you wish to dream about? The user enters living in a city which never sleeps. And then instantly an environment is generated based on that prompt, a city that never sleeps, where all of the geometry here, but also all of the text, all of the signage, all of the characters, and all of the dialogue are generated by that prompt. Here we're encountering an NPC, which stands for non-player character, and they are saying things that relate to the prompt that the user has entered. For example, like being told you can have great pizza for $1. This is all New York related. So this is very powerful. And right now this is happening digitally. But all of a sudden, you know, what's happening there is the AI itself is not just automatically creating the environment based on the user input. We all talk about these prompts, and this term prompt engineering is becoming more and more understood as it relates to AI. But that user input of the city that never sleeps is not the prompt. The prompt is something that you never see, and it's what the engineer of the experience is doing with that prompt. And so the engineer is kind of behind the scenes in a Wizard of Oz sort of way, saying, take the user's input and create a world based on these parameters. So the AI itself isn't creating the world from scratch. It's doing what the engineer or the designer is telling it to do based on the user input. So all of a sudden, these things can be generated instantly, and that removes another huge obstacle, both in terms of the cost and the business model. And again, I stress this over and over, what is there to do and what is there to see? All of a sudden now we can have these non-player characters within these worlds that don't have pre-written dialogue, that don't have traditional, you know, branching, pre-recorded sentences that they say, but they can actually have conversations with you that are endless and that are incredibly affordable to create. So this opens up so many possibilities for storytelling and narrative within the metaverse. And I think that's the thing that people are sort of underestimating or forgetting. That's the most compelling thing. Story is always going to be the most compelling thing.
Michael, one thing on that, Darren, can I just say one thing and then I'll cut it because I can see you've like time, is in theme park designing for 8th grade, as far as comprehension and understanding, so everybody can get it. And also Tuesday at 10. What are you doing with your property Tuesday at 10? If you put both of those into ChatGPT or environments like, you know, the sheep, Project Electric Sheep, how are you looking at this from the lens of previs or pre-design, or how are you targeting all your content to a particular level? It's endless as far as opportunity. It's not taking over engineers and designs. It's amplifying the opportunity to get it right.
Yeah, and I think especially for this audience, what you were mentioning before, Michael, about, you know, everything's still kind of keying off, you know, the story, and the story being the core of what we're building from, instead of just looking at what can we do with the technology. That's pretty key for this audience. Just to kind of close out the topic of tools, I want to hit a couple of other questions relatively quickly and make sure we stay within our time. Just on the topic of tools, Kathleen, did you have anything else you wanted to talk about in terms of things you see that are coming or interesting? We've talked separately about 5XR and new Apple headsets and various things like that. You're on mute.
If anybody's put on any head-mounted display, any virtual reality gear or any mixed reality gear, in the last 6 months, the idea of pass-through, being able to be in a full virtual world, but double tap on your head-mounted display and see the real world, has been looking like night vision goggles for years. So now we have full color, full rendered almost pass-through, which is a game changer in the illusion of what is reality. So to me, that's a whole subject in its own right, Darren, but I would add that as another level of how crazy we are walking into crazy town as far as the illusion of reality.
Yeah, absolutely. All kinds of new things coming. Dane, anything that's interesting you in terms of tools that
Just
you are using or you see emerging?
everything is proprietary. The first thing I hear from every client when we sit down together is we're doing something that's never been done before. So what that does is undercut any long-term investment in tools. And I love everything Michael just showed and everything we're discussing, but we have to think of scale. Just because we can do it, if it's niche, you're going to you won't attract the robust financing and traffic that will really stand this up into something substantial. And I think initially it's going to be versions of Mario Kart, IP that is worldwide. You know, you just see that logo in any language, you know, you have expectations and we try to meet them. But I think where we need to look is what's happening next. Where is the next generation's IP coming from? And I think a lot of it is driven by user generated content, and there's a lot of agility required around something going viral and having to move very quickly and pivot towards something that you know, is very different than Harry Potter or something that has, you know, been around for generations and is solid and reliable. I think we're going to be asked to do those calculations much more quickly if it's going to scale, if it's going to attract a large audience.
Yep. Just going to keep moving. Something else, Kathleen?
Yeah, I was going to say, if people haven't been to VidCon, I would go to VidCon, because VidCon is a conference just solely on social media influencers. And when you walk into VidCon and you see 10,000 people standing around somebody doing something that you are like, what are they doing? And they're like, they got 6 million followers. I'm like, what are they doing exactly? And so I look like the old lady in the room. But when you really look at VidCon, it's what Dane, you're saying is it's the future of looking at what becomes quickly viral. And I hate chasing that, because there's substance separate aside from what influencers are doing to become viral. So it is a bit of a cat and mouse.
Yeah.
All right, so just to hit on a couple of other topics really quickly that we wanted to touch on. I wanted to talk about standardization. So you've got all these different tools and approaches. It's got to be hard to speak a common language and work with others. Just, I know in the engineering world I come from, we've got codes and standards established by ASME or ASTM or these governing bodies. So we all work from the same basis. But in the metaverse, let's think about standards there. So just going to Kathleen, are there standards that are kind of converging or reaching some kind of consensus, and how are they being documented?
Yeah, just in the 5-minute opener, I literally dropped in the Metaverse Standards Forum today. I gave that talk before and never had it in there. That's how quick and new the conversation is, even though there's plenty of people who have been at the, whiteboards trying to evangelize this in the 2.0 era. But as far as, we see what's just happened with FTX and crypto, and everyone's like, how could have that happened? We don't know this already. And no, we're in the Wild West. So the Metaverse Standards Forum is the best aggregate right now of folks on it. And I would say sign up if you haven't, just to get on their newsletter, and participate if you want. But there are many other organizations also trying to standardize. We've got all the lists we've seen for the last 3 years, Tony Parisi's list, Ari Bar-El's list. We got so many lists going on of what the metaverse is. Now it's actually becoming centralized. So I'm happy to share other resources, but the Metaverse Standards Forum is a good one to point out.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Can I add to that also? I think interoperability is going to be incredibly key. Mm-hmm. I don't think these attempts at these walled gardens where, you create an avatar in Facebook Horizons or Meta Horizons, but you can only use it in Horizons and you can't bring it into, say, Roblox, for example. I think that's an old way of thinking. We've partnered with an incredible startup called Ready Player Me, which is the exact opposite of that. And they've built an API for both Unity and Unreal so that any app developed by anyone using Unity or Unreal can ensure that the avatars used will work with any other app developed with Unity and Unreal. And they currently have over 5,000 partners, I think actually over 6,000 now. So this interoperability will be really key to getting mass adoption.
Well, it's interoperability, identity, privacy, sovereignty, security, all of these areas that are covered by the Standards Forum. But in one of the questions I see, the Gatherverse, Christopher Lafayette and his Gatherverse Summit is doing an amazing job on humanity first values, covering ethics, safety, health, mental health, all of it. And if it's not the Metaverse Standards Forum, there's so many of us that are coming at this from different points of view, but the Gatherverse community is a great community to also check out, who's pushing on this very conversation also.
Yeah, so I'm really in my kind of linear thinking brain really kind of likes this discussion of tools and standards and kind of the real life application. So Dean, just going to you maybe and kind of thinking about that a little bit. We're going to take all these things and apply them. You're talking about being a vendor and you've got customers coming in, and when you got a client or customer comes in, how do you kind of work through their expectations and help them define what they want, going from that kind of big idea to here's how we might approach that?
Well, it's a tug of war between what's been done previously, what's best for the project, and then the resource question. So, as a Marshall McLuhan saying that I have as my signature on my personal email, which quoting Marshall McLuhan, if it works, it's obsolete. The moment it is functional and solves the problems, no one's interested and they want to move on. So the way that we combat that is it's no longer enough to just be a great fine artist and understand the principles of light and composition. You have to have some Python skills. You need to be able to code what the client is asking for, or what you imagine based on a client meeting. And that has to happen relatively quickly. And the hot potato is always who's funding that? Where is that coming from? Because it's very difficult to expect an individual financier to back that. So again, I think it's scale. It's creating something that draws a massive enough audience that there's a good reason to start to develop these standards. And for better or worse, whoever gets there first will probably have a lot of influence over what those standards are and how that crystallizes. But we're looking beyond that to what happens next, and where is this going next? And I think it is some form of user-generated content or giving more agency to the users and finding community, because we are back, as many people have said in the forum, and I'm sure no one would disagree with, this all comes back to story and community. We're all still just sitting around the fire telling stories. This is just a new forum with new potential abilities. And the Venn diagram where that overlaps with gaming is where this is going to sprout from.
Yeah, so continuing on, there's actually a note in the chat that Kathleen, I think, relates to something I think we wanted to touch on with you and Grace. Richie mentioned how do ethics and safety and health and mental health get built into tools and integrated into metaverse design. I know when we talked before the presentation here, we talked, you talked about having a focus on humanity first values. To me, those sound like they're kind of similar points and touches. So what does this mean to you, and how do you keep that in mind?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Okay. Two communities that I've had the good fortune to work with have been the Indigenous community and the neurodiverse community. And one thing I learned that has changed my entire perspective. I'm going to talk about the Indigenous community. The Indigenous community with Indigenous wisdom and science I'm going to make this really succinct, looks at a tree very differently than I do. The Indigenous community looks at a tree and sees 7 generations of families, sees kayaking, sees fishing, sees the salmon run. So why are we coding a tree in world building exercises for a tree just to be a tree? Yeah, right now the affordances are that you can walk around a tree. Can you sit on the stump of a tree? Sure. But when we really embed object-oriented design with Indigenous wisdom, now we're talking how we're up-leveling the standards and how we're bringing humanity first. So that's one example. I could also get into neurodiversity around shapes and how people are safe in environments with shapes and no words. So that's just one example.
Great. So we're bumping up almost to the end of our time. So we'll kind of wrap up with a bit of just a lightning round question around to everybody. And it's really sort of the wrap up type of question. In 30 seconds or less, really. Where do you think we're headed next with metaverse and spatial computing design? And any final thoughts? Maybe we'll start with Michael.
Oh boy. Well, I think anybody who says that they know where it's heading is immediately somebody to be wary of, because we really don't know. What I will say is that right now, people do metaverse things, or they create metaverse experiences to have press that they have created a metaverse experience. The experience is not the return on investment that they get, because the adoption is not there yet. It's a marketing stunt right now, but that's changing so rapidly. And as all of the things that we talked about continue to evolve, it gets cheaper. You can reuse assets from the real world. You can use AI to populate those worlds, and it becomes much more affordable, much more interactive, much more immersive. Not to mention the fact that the hardware, is the headsets are going to get smaller and lighter and all of these things. So it's a very exciting time. I know I've probably exceeded my 30 seconds, but the last thing that I'll say is, I think from a storytelling standpoint, there's a real transition happening, Darren, as you alluded to, between linear narrative and open world narrative. And that's where things are going. I just saw the first episode of The Last of Us over the weekend, and it was amazing. But guess what? It's not a huge surprise that it translates to television well, because it's a very linear narrative based game. So it plays into TV and film, as opposed to the most popular games now, like say an Elden Ring or Legend of Zelda. Now there's story systems where users can work within the system to create their own emergent story. And I do think that that's what the next generation of our audience wants, is that agency.
Great. Dane, any final thoughts from you?
Short term, I think, and this is dangerous because this is recorded, and as Michael pointed out, I'm probably going to be wrong, but since you're asking, I'm going to dive in. I think it's public spaces. The sense I get is what we're craving and missing right now in the world is that shared physical experience, being with devotees of a certain game or IP or property or belief system, and then augmenting that digitally. If you think of all the love and care that we put into building environments for films and television, and the fact that as soon as it airs and goes down market, it's on a hard drive in someone's box in a studio on a shelf, never to be used again, and people spent hours and missed time with their family crafting this. Wouldn't it be wonderful to stand it up at LACMA and invite people in to have their own experience in that environment that they love and know just as well as the creators, and share that with strangers who have common values? I think that space hasn't really opened up yet. And if you look at declining theatrical revenue and whatever phase we're at in COVID right now, I think there's a real appetite to get out and share space, but augment it digitally. So my bet is on shared experiences in public spaces.
That's great, and it's recorded, so like you said, guaranteed to come back and haunt you 5 years from now.
Someone will, yeah.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
All right, and Kathleen.
I got 3 quick points. 1, immersive storytelling. It's always going to come down to story and what immersive storytelling is. 2, I had the good fortune of sitting on a graduate crit for the University of Idaho. Unfortunately, what's happened down that school with their virtual technology and design lab, and listen to the kids tell us what they think their job is going to be in the next 5, 10, 15, 25 years. So, image recollection designer. These kids are for real. They're going to be an image recollection designer. Take a pass at that. They're going to be an AI reality designer. And they're going to be a dream influencer and a dream influence designer for your world. So they're already there blurring the lines. So take a page out of that. And then lastly, I would, and I said this on the earlier call, I would rather be with no other group than experienced designers for the next 5 and 10 years of the circus that we're about to walk into, with everything up for grabs on what's real, what's not, and just trusting your intuition on this one, which also will be in question in 10 years too. But that's my final thought.
Well, that's great, because you're in the right crowd here on this
Yeah.
in this group. So, all right, we've run a little bit over time. So, in terms of audience questions, I may just pick one. I don't want to go too far over, but just there's been a number of them put in there, and several from Dr. Martin Rialis. So, I'm going to just grab one of his, since he's contributed a few. And feel free, anybody, to jump in. Will augmented reality become prevalent with the blending of real locations and virtual characters in real-time game playing?
Real-time game playing.
Anybody have thoughts on that? Kathleen is saying yes. So there you
I
go.
mean,
If
I
we're
agree with Kathleen. It's a
yeah,
big
if we're
yes.
calling out, I was going to say, if we're calling out augmented reality versus virtual reality or mixed
Yes.
reality, if that's one question, or in augmented reality alone, where is that going to blur the lines between reality and being in a fantasy world, and how and when that is going to blur? The answer is yes. And augmented reality right now, you're dealing with something like this small in a screen, so you're not fully immersed. So the advancements of AR and how we converge, whether you're wearing gear or using a device, or if the room is immersive, everybody's coming at that right now, trying to solve it. So the short answer is yes.
Right. And maybe one more quick pointer question. What happens, again, focused on the audience here, what happens to storytelling when gameplay is determined by players? And Kyle Rozier also kind of pointed out, yeah, that's the question of the hour, a narrative arc versus branching narrative that can kind of go anywhere.
I think branching narrative is just a natural progression. Good storytelling would be informed by rules. We all know what characters would and wouldn't do. We all groan when there's an adaptation. I mean, one of the worst things I read in the trades is when they're remaking a favorite film or adapting a novel, because I know that the imaginary world I created in my head when I was reading it, there's no way that's going to be replicated on screen. So I think that once that's factored in, I don't see a competition between branching narrative and linear narrative. I think that the world, look at films like Run Lola Run or Rashomon, the world evolves and stories evolve from different point of views. So the expansion into branching narrative is just a natural progression. I think it's key, and I think it is going to drive whatever the movers are in this space over the next 3 to 5 years as it evolves. It's not an either or.
Yeah.
All right, so I think, go ahead, Michael.
I'll just add to that. I do think that finding the sweet spot between professionally created narrative as well as user behavior to create emergent stories, finding the sweet spot where those two things collide, I think that's where the real magic is going to happen.
Great storytelling to me is when something unexpected happens in the entertainment I'm consuming, and then in retrospect, it was completely logical, but it shocks me. That's the craft. And that can take various forms. It can, Kathleen can be following one character and I can be following another within that ecosystem, but it's the same rules apply. I mean, that part of what we're doing has to preserve its integrity, and good storytelling is at the heart of all of this.
All right, and I think that's a great place to wrap up. So thanks to everyone for joining us today and sticking with us for the extra 10 minutes here. Hopefully people found value in going a little bit over. So in closing, I'll just ask one more time for your feedback on future topics we can expand on. We've got that link in the chat posted several times. So click on that, open it up before we close the Zoom meeting, and let us know what you think. Again, thanks to Kathleen, Dane, and Michael for sharing your knowledge with us today. And please look for future TEA online events as they're shared through social media and on the TEA Connect website. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
you, Darren.
Thank you. Thank you, TEA.